Most of you guys find speaking the most difficult part of learning English. So we decided to create this big, long video talking about the aspects of spoken English. What do you do if you forget a word? How to speak fast and sound more natural? How not to be afraid of speaking English when you talk to a native speaker? And how to practice English if you have no one to practice with. Watch this video because it's going to help you stop worrying and start speaking English. I am afraid to speak English. People will laugh at me. What if I start a conversation with a native speaker and I suddenly forget words? What if I just can't support a conversation? Like I won't be able to use my English. I have so many fears. What should I do? Hey guys. Welcome to Bookish English. Today, we're going to talk about those questions that arise in your head whenever you are, confronted with a situation to speak to a native speaker in English. I just want to say, first of all, I'm pretty sure you've heard that many times, that it's just all in your head. But I know we need to kind of dig deeper and talk about your fears because I had those fears. Like, even now, when I speak German, because I'm a perfectionist, I get very nervous because I know I make mistakes, and I know I forget words, and I know everything like this happens, and my face turns red, and I just, and it actually starts happening. Like, when I'm relaxed, my German is a lot better. Like if I'm in an environment just talking to friends or just talking to someone at a store, it would be like really smooth language. When I start thinking like, oh my God. This is one of the reasons I stopped recording videos about German, just because it's been declining and I have those fears. But I also have them in English. But with English, I understood that English is a tool. It's an instrument that I use to improve my life. And without it, I won't be able to achieve my new goals. I won't be able to get to new levels of whatever, YouTube, of my company's development. So today I'm going to start with fear number 1. People are going to laugh at me. The only time I've been laughed at in terms of my English is, when, left in real life. Like, I get mocked about my accent a lot on social media, but it happens because I get hundreds of thousands of views, and I understand that even kittens get dislikes on YouTube, and there will be people who are unhappy with whatever I'm doing. And just because I'm doing it, they will be posting bad comments and hating me for whatever I do. But I also understand sometimes it's actually good to have that feedback because people tell me, oh, Marina, that was wrong. That phrase was incorrect. But they're not laughing at me. They're telling me how to improve, and I accept that with gratitude. So, the only time I've been laughed at actually happened when I was talking to my friend. And, I told him I was so hooked up with this person. Like, I wanted to say that we were really connected with a person, but I used a phrasal verb, to hook up with someone. And it actually means have a sexual relationship. And this is not what it was, not what I meant. And another time, it happened recently on Instagram. I came to a butcher store, and I posted a story that I missed his meat. And meat, in American conversational English, when you say, I missed his meat, means I missed his penis. And again, people laughed at me, but I thought it was funny. Like, it's not like, and it was like DMS. People, oh my God, Marina, do you know it has a second meaning? And it's not like they are angry at me for making that mistake. It was like, a friendly advice. So I've never ever had like people in real life like laugh at me, like say, "Oh my God, your English is so bad. What are you doing here?" Never ever happened in my life. And I started practicing English at the age of 14, and I was hanging out with really mean, like, teenagers can be really mean, and they can tell really bad things in your face. But never has that ever happened to me because people understand that I'm making an effort to be understood. They understand that I come from a completely different culture and that I've never spoken English to my parents or to my grandparents. So, the only exception here is social media. Like if you're speaking English on social media, just be ready to get those hate comments. And even if you're perfect in English, even if you're 120 out of 120 on TOEFL, and you post a video on how you got that score, you would still, like, if it goes viral, you would still get comments from people, "It's impossible, your English is not good enough," etc. Like, there would always be people on social media hating you. But in real life, there's like this tiny chance it's gonna happen. But it's not gonna happen, guys. Native speakers, especially Americans, especially British people, are very friendly. In real life, people who I met, people who I talked to in English, even when I was intermediate, they were really friendly and really supportive. So, it's all in our heads. And I think if you have this fear in English, like people would laugh at you, you probably have it in other aspects of your life. So, it's just another reason for you to sit down with yourself and think about, like, I don't have to be liked by everyone. And again, I am a person who has this feeling all the time. I want to be liked by everyone. I want it. I'm fighting this. Like, once I started my channels, I realized I can't be liked by everyone. But it was really hurting me every time I read something negative about myself. And it took me a while to understand and to realize that my goal is to use my talents, to grow as an entrepreneur, YouTuber, whatever, as a mom, and do the best that I can. What other people think about me, it's other people's business. They have their own understanding of reality. They have their own experience. Maybe they just have a bad day, but it doesn't have anything to do with me. If you want to dig deeper into this problem, I really advise you to read a book, The Courage to be Disliked. It's like one of those books that I started reading last year. I think last year I had this, personality crisis. But I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. I'm afraid to do this because people would comment, and they would be unhappy with what I do. And I started just doing a lot of psychological research, and I started reading a lot of books. And that was one of the books that really, really helped me. Like, it just talks about how you can't control other people's emotions. You can't control what they think of you. What you have to do is focus on what you can do the best. Focus on your goals and start and achieve them. Another thing I could recommend, watch the one on Netflix. It talks just about this woman entrepreneur who's a little ruthless. And she's not like a role model that I want you to follow, but it just talks about how she deals with all the problems that arise. When I was thinking, like, if I were in her place, I would have definitely given up, but she continued going. I really encourage you to read those books, to watch the one on Netflix, and to just read interviews related to this topic, because this would help you in your life in general, not just with English. Of course, you will realize that You know, the majority of people won't laugh at you. And if they will, it is their problem, not your problem. You're doing your best. You're practicing your English. You are putting effort into being understood by people who don't even speak your language and don't even make an effort to learn your language. Okay, psychology class is over. Let's move on to some practical advice regarding other things that you can do. So, there is another fear. What if the conversation gets too complicated and I won't be able to support it? I also get this fear. Like, for example, again, I can't really relate to this in English right now because my language is pretty, I would say, pretty advanced to talk about all kinds of topics. But with German, I can totally relate. And when people start asking me about business, I understand that I will start a conversation. I will talk about my company. But if they start digging deeper, I would be like, oh my God, this is too complicated. And in 2018, I had to have a surgery in Germany. And I was surprised I was actually able to communicate with doctors and nurses about medical stuff. Because basically, when we talk about English, we have 1,000 words that make up 86% of the conversation. And what you really need to know, if you know those 1,000 words, if you go into a specific conversation, you can always ask for definitions of, like, specific words. So it was in Germany, during that surgery, I was like, oh, and what is this in German? I can say that in English, or I can show you on Google. And once I learned, like, 5 or 7 words that I needed that were related to that surgery, the conversation became really easy. Because you don't need to know, like, the whole idea of surgery medical business vocabulary to support an advanced conversation. All you need is those 1,000 words. And also, if you're like, oh, I don't know how many words I know right now, this doesn't actually matter. If you understand this video, that means you know enough words to support a conversation. So start practicing. And if you forget a word, if you don't know the term, if you forget a word, you can just Google it on your phone with Google Translate and show your party this word, and you will be totally fine. And this is, by the way you learn this word really fast. Another question is, what if I feel shy? What if I stop and freeze? Okay, this can happen as well if you are too nervous about the conversation. The trick that helps me a lot is to pretend that you're someone else. Because again, stopping and freezing has to do something with what's going on with you internally. Like maybe you're, again, thinking that people are gonna laugh at you, and just there are so many thoughts in your head that you can't just process them. So imagine that you're a different person. You probably, if you're speaking to a native speaker, you're probably in a new country. Nobody knows you. And once this conversation is over, you will part ways with this person. So, try to pretend you're your favorite movie character. Try to pretend you're an American if you're in America. Try to pretend that you are this famous blogger that you really, really like. I don't know. Try to pretend to be someone else just for this conversation. It just lets your fears go, and it helps you become more confident when you speak. What if I offend someone? That's another fear. And one thing I wanted to remember here is that when we talk to a person, people pay attention to our body language, to our facial expressions, to our emotions, and even if you say something incorrectly in English, they would understand you didn't really mean it. And also, they would understand. Like, if they tell you about something and you, don't understand, but you just say yes, a lot of times people will tell you, but you didn't understand, right? And they would explain in another way. It's okay to say, "Oh, I didn't mean that, sorry. Was that offensive because my English is not good enough?" It's okay. But if you're smiling, if you're open, then people will understand 100% that you didn't mean to offend them. That it was like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. That is something that we're used to in our culture," or you mixed up the word. People would understand. Now, let's wrap up this video with a couple of tips. If you have an important conversation in English coming up, maybe you have an interview with a university, or I remember when we were preparing for the Y Combinator interview, it's an accelerator here in Silicon Valley. The worst mistake that you can do is actually overthink. It makes sense to prepare. It makes sense to go through questions that were asked before in this kind of environment, like go through questions that universities ask during the interview, go through questions that people are normally asked, etc. But I would say, take your time, prepare for 2 hours, but don't take too long. Because when it takes too long, when it takes days, we over-prepared for a Y Combinator interview, and instead of relaxing before it, instead of just catching the vibe of Silicon Valley, we were just brainstorming how we were going to fight that small company that is trying to do the same thing, and people there didn't even know about it. Now, when I look back at it, it's important to know what you're talking about, like to tell your story, to tell why you're interested in this or that university, this or that subject. But don't overthink. Like, they would probably ask basic questions, or if they ask some complicated questions, it is almost impossible to predict what they're going to ask. So, learn some basic things, but then let yourself relax. Watch something in English. Just put yourself into that environment before the conversation or before the test so that your brain switches from your language into English. It will be a lot easier. The next tip, be nervous and do it anyway. Michael Jordan once said, "Being nervous isn't bad. It just means something important is happening." So, my tip here, and I did an interview with Justin Kahn on Silicon Valley Girl, and he said, "Don't be afraid of your emotions. Don't suppress them. Tell yourself, okay, I am nervous about this conversation I'm going to have in English. It is fine. I understand that I'm nervous because it is an important conversation. I understand that my English is maybe not good enough, and I haven't practiced a lot. But I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to use this conversation as practice. And after the conversation, I'm going to sit down and think what was good and what was bad." I was really bad at, analyzing things afterwards because I'm this perfectionist. And when I shoot a video, I don't want to see it just because I understand I could have done better. And this is an endless process, but I actually taught myself to look at numbers. I taught myself to actually sit down and think what I did wrong and what could be done better, and it helps a lot with your progression. So, after the conversation, sit down with yourself and think, did I do everything I could do? And if not, just have some tips for yourself for the next conversation. And I have this note in my iPhone where I just put in things that I could do better in my videos. And, I have those tips that I always look at before an important video and just remind myself that I make those mistakes. It is okay. It's good that I know about them, and I'm gonna be better in the next video. The next tip: do it until it feels normal. Just keep having those conversations in English. Keep being shy. Keep being nervous. At some stage, you're going to be tired of it, especially if you're in an English-speaking country or if you're applying to universities. Like, I have a lot of people here in the US who are applying to universities, mostly children of my friends. Oh my God, I'm so old. But they're applying to like 24 colleges at once. And, by interview number 10, you just get tired of it and you just get used to it and you don't feel nervous anymore. So keep doing it. Also, adopt the growth mindset, something we've already talked about, like, I am bad at speaking English, my accent is not good enough yet, but I'm using this as a way to practice. And I'm using this exact conversation as my way to improve. Learn to laugh at yourself. Life is simple. We overcomplicate so many things. We tend to think that this meeting is a game changer. It is not. You can always do another meeting. There are so many people in the world. There are so many opportunities. And if you don't get any result from the upcoming conversation, it doesn't matter. You can do a lot more conversations. The most important thing is that you have yourself, you have your time, you have your brain that helps you speak English. Like, don't create problems for yourself. Enjoy life. We only have one life, and I want you to go ahead and enjoy it. And look at everything from a positive perspective, especially if it's something smaller, like a conversation with a native speaker. Come on, it's gonna be fine. Life is easy. Smile. Tell yourself that if not today, you're gonna make it tomorrow. If not tomorrow, you're gonna make it in a week. It is fine. You'll get there. Hey guys. Welcome to Lingua Marina. Today we're going to talk about a psychological topic, when you forget words. Happens to me all the time. I'm talking to a person, and the worst thing, I kind of have this word in my head just right now. But now when I'm talking about this, I forgot this word. Like, it happens to me all the time, and I can totally understand you. It happens a lot at any level of English. And today we're going to talk about ways that you can navigate through this situation, and hopefully you will remember some of the methods and tips that I will give you, and you would use them later when you're talking to native speakers or just when you're speaking English and you forget a word. So first of all, a really basic tip, super basic. Try and say this word in your language. Maybe if you're from Finland, that would be a little tricky because Finnish is one of those weirdest languages where even computer doesn't sound like computer. Because if I say computer, this is a Russian word. People in America would understand what I mean. Like, you can try and make it sound more American. Computer. And people would understand because there are so many words these days that are very, very similar across many languages. So whenever you forget something, like if you really want to say a word, because there are other ways you can navigate through the situation, but if you really want to say that word, try and say it in your own language. Maybe something comes out of this. If not, no problem. I see people do it all the time here. So, I have a gardener who's from Mexico, and his English, I would say, is pre-intermediate. And sometimes he just forgets words. He would just say something in Spanish, and I was like, oh, okay, because I learned Italian. They're kind of similar languages. and that helps a lot for us to communicate with each other. The second tip, just ask the person who you're talking to remind you, was that word? And Americans use it all the time. Oh, what was that? What was that word? Oh yeah, like, what do you call it? Sorry. Oh yeah, that one. So, Americans use these phrases all the time. So just write them down, and whenever you forget a word, just ask the person who you're talking to. The next tip is to remember the stats that I'm just about to give you. So, there was this guy, a scientist, Dr. Mehrabian, and he analyzed speech and concluded that 7% of what we understand is verbal. Just 7%. 38% is vocal, like your intonations, and 55% is visual. That means that you just need to use your visual signs. The problem with phone calls here is that you can't do that, or if you're on Zoom, then you can. But this is why a lot of people struggle with making phone calls in English. But if you're talking to a real person, if you are on Zoom doing a video call, then use your hands. Use your acting capabilities to show what you mean. Like, if you're struggling to say a dog, you can say woof woof. You can say meow meow or whatever. Something I forgot a couple of days ago. I forgot the word blow kisses, like when you do this. This is called blow kisses, and my daughter loves to do that. And I wanted to ask her to do blow kisses, but I forgot how to say it, and I just said, do this. I wouldn't recommend this method during an exam, but it's something you can totally use in normal life. The next tip is actually to stop and paraphrase the whole thing. Because again, I know where it is coming from. Sometimes you either had this word on the tip of your tongue and it just evaporated when you started saying a phrase. It is probably a complicated, super advanced word. Happens to me all the time again. And the way to deal with it is to just stop a phrase and say it in a completely different way. Because you are probably translating in your head from your own language to English, and then you forget the word, and then you're stuck. The best thing to do there is to go back to the beginning of the phrase and just say it in different words. And again, I'm not relating to words that you can forget, like object words, cat, dog, blow kisses. You can't really paraphrase something in order to remember that word, but something that brings more complexity to your speech, like evaporate, like the word that I use. Maybe go back to the beginning of the sentence. Don't say, the word just evaporated from my mouth. Say, I forgot this word. Like, use easier words. This helps me a lot. Again, this is like we're discussing different methods. This one is really advanced, like when you just want to sound too advanced. When you want to sound like a native speaker, but you realize you're not yet there in terms of your vocabulary. It's okay to go back, to stop, paraphrase, and sound like an intermediate person. But at least the other person would understand you. And there is nothing bad in sounding like an intermediate person. The next tip is to just try and come up with words yourself. Like some words in English, they're just a mix of different words, like waterfall, obviously, right? This example with blowing kisses, like you're blowing kisses, that is obvious as well. So, if you just forget a word, try to make it up. Try to take it from French or Italian because 30% of English vocabulary was adopted from French. So you can actually use that language as well if you know French. By the way, try to use French words. And of course, there are other tips that are super useful, like learning synonyms. But this is not something you would do in a situation where you forgot a word, but something you can remember now and do later on when you're studying English. Remember synonyms. Learn words and synonyms. Intelligent, smart, clever, witty, etc. Learn them in batches. This way, when you forget one of the words, you remember the synonyms. Another tip, use a dictionary that explains the word in English. Because again, when you forget a word, at least you can explain it in English because you've read the explanation. You have something there in your mind. We're not using 100% of our brain capacity. When we read something, it's somewhere there in our minds. And we've all watched the movies where people are able to memorize everything. It's just, our brain is capable of a lot of things, and don't underestimate the power of using such a dictionary and reading the explanation of the word in English, because later on, something will click, and you would remember that explanation. Today, we're going to talk about finding people to practice your English language. And I know speaking is the hardest part for a lot of students. By the way, right now in the comments below, please let me know, what is your main struggle with the English language right now? I remember when I was at school and I didn't live in the US, I was desperate to find people to practice my English with, and whenever I saw somebody from abroad, I would be the first person to talk to them. I'm going to share some of the tips that are just common that other people use as well. So, first of all, baby teenage Marina, around 14 years old, 14 to 16 years old. This is, at the time when I came back from the UK for the first time, and I realized that my English is nothing close to native speaker level. And I thought I was so proficient, because I started learning English when I was 4, and then I went to school when I was 7, where we had English every single day, and I thought I am just perfect. But then I came to the UK. I couldn't understand people. People couldn't understand me. It was a complete mess, and I felt really like an outlier because I couldn't communicate with people. When I came back to Russia, I told myself, Marina, you have to solve this problem. Marina, you have to go out there and practice English. So, number one thing that I did, I started going to museums in my city. And I was lucky to be born and raised in a city called St. Petersburg, which is one of the best cities in the world in terms of architecture and museums. And we have the Hermitage, and the Hermitage is this huge museum that has a lot of art, and it attracts a lot of tourists. So I would just go to that museum. I had a free pass as a Russian student. I went into that museum and I just looked at people who were confused or trying to find their way. And I don't know how to explain this, but you can always tell whether a person is Russian or whether a person is a foreigner. So I could tell from 10 meters or 20 meters that I see some foreigners and they are lost. I would just approach them and say, "Hey, do you need any help?" I was just, I was desperate to practice English, and this is something that you can do once. I don't know if museums are open in your country or if you have any museums in your city, but try that. Just walk around the museum, look at people, see tourists, approach them, and ask them if they need any help. That helped me a lot. There were a couple of ladies who were lost, and then I showed them the way. We kept walking around the city for like an hour or so, and we kept practicing English. So that was really useful. Number 2, another thing that you can do. Find a British consul or U.S. consulate or embassy in your country and just write them an email, or reach out to them, or see if they have any events. Again, depends on the country. In my country, Russia, when I was back at school, they had a lot of events for people to just come over. Like, British Council would have weekly meetups where people who like English literature could gather. U.S. Embassy would have different events, like Flex, which is kind of a competition where winners can go to the U.S. But even if you take part in that competition, you get to talk to people from the embassy, Americans. And then another thing the U.S. Embassy did, they organized movie nights, and again, you could come there and talk to people. And this is what I did. I was a subscriber on their Facebook pages. I was following them everywhere, and whenever I had time to attend the event, I would just practice English.